This is exciting. But really, what I want to do today is give my personal message of my story. And so I want to start by asking a question. What is the perennial question we always get since we're from first grade to second grade to third grade, high school, junior high? Our parents ask us that question, our teachers, our friends, even perfect strangers. What is it that they ask us? They ask us, what do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up? And so my message for you today is that I want to challenge y'all to think past what you want to be, to really think about what you want to do with your life. Because I think that if you can answer that question, that's what's going to bring you meaning and fulfillment and joy. And so let me start my story with my mom. My mom, Dr. Argelia Velez Rodriguez, is a brilliant woman. She was the first Black woman to earn a PhD in mathematics in Cuba from the University of Havana. She was the first female dean of the Math and Science departments at Bishop College, and she was a very respected program officer at the National Science Foundation. And she was really very dedicated to underrepresentation, to helping minorities succeed in math and science. But she was brilliant because she asked me that question when no one else did. What do you want to do with your life? I was 17 years old. I had no idea what she was saying to me. So I didn't give it any more thought. So I went off to Stanford, and I got my engineering degree. And then I went to work for Booz Allen, which is a big consulting firm in Park Avenue, New York. And then I went back, I got my MBA from Harvard, and then I went back to the firm. Life was fantastic. It was the 80s, the indulgent 80s. We had expense accounts, we had wardrobes accounts, we had entertainment accounts. We flew first class everywhere. We had courtside tickets at Madison Square Garden, at the US Open. Open passes to Studio 54. It was just perfect. And the work was interesting too, because I got to work with a bunch of different industries and companies in terms of developing real solid solutions to big complex problems and strategies. And it was also a place where I was pretty much reminded every day about how underrepresented people like me were. Black, Latina, female, all rolled up into one. But it was the life that I had envisioned for myself. But then one day, something just started to gnaw at me. I started to ask myself, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? Do I really care if American Express makes more money? Do I really care, if Boeing has a higher profit margin because they've lowered their production cost? I didn't know what was missing, but I knew that I wouldn't find it if I stayed on the path that I had worked so hard to get on. So I took a risk. I left the firm, I left New York, and I moved down to where my mother was, in DC, to find myself. And of course, while I was finding myself, I had to make a living. So I started consulting. I started consulting with small businesses who wanted to grow their businesses. I started consulting with individuals who wanted to start businesses. And at one point, one of my mother's former colleagues from the National Science Foundation called me and said, can you help me start my business? I want to start a consulting business that's going to focus on supporting the progression of minorities and underrepresented populations in math and science. Not only did I help him start the business, I slowly became part of it and started working with different corporations and school systems and universities. And I found the work so interesting because I thought there's so much more that can be done. And then I also thought that my particular perspective as an engineer and an MBA, I had a different perspective to what had been traditionally considered educational problems. It was also the time where I started to feel something about this work feels good. Something about this work feels important. And so it just happened at that time that fate would have it, I get a call from Don Graham, the former owner of the Washington Post. And he says to me, he said, me, Bill Marriott, Vance Kaufman, who was the head of Lockheed at the time, Gene and Steve Case, who were with AOL, Al Lord from Sallie Mae, Bank of America, many, many corporations, and the mayor and the superintendent had decided that they were going to face the issue of DC kids not going to college. At the time, less than 25% of DC kids would enroll in college, and less than 15% would graduate over 10 years. And they said, we want to fix this. We want you to double the number of DC students who go to college, and then we want to triple the number who graduate. And the program is going to be called the District of Columbia College Access Program, DCCAP for short. My first thought is, oh my God, how is anyone going to do that? And then my second thought was really, it was like a clarity that came over me. The fog was lifted. I realized at that moment that this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I really want to do with my life. And once I accepted the challenges, the ideas just kept flowing. I mean, I would wake up in the middle of the night about what I'm going to do next. And that was the first time that I really felt that my engineering and my MBA degree mattered, because I was going to do something with it. And really, if I thought about it, it was a finance problem. How are you going to fund a nonprofit organization, completely privately funded nonprofit organization, in a city where the primary employer is the government? How are we going to subsidize, help students from DC go to college when there's no state university system? All the other kids in all the other 50 states, they had choices. DC students only had one. What obligation did the federal government have to step in on that? What would be the return on investment for our donors for them to keep giving and giving, because we were making long-term scholarship commitments to these students? It was an engineering problem. How do you set up and build a large-scale system to provide college counseling to a city and also to support students enrolled at 500 universities around the country? It was a marketing problem. How do you convince poor parents and guardians to set aside money for a child's education, to perhaps give up a potential wage earner for the next 4 or 5 years, to give up working on Saturday for their overtime to come to a financial aid seminar, to value higher ed when you haven't had the benefit of it? Particularly when at those days, I think GW was like $60,000 a year, and the average family income in DC was $34,000. So that was a marketing. I had to sell the idea, I had to sell the product of higher education, that higher education would change not only your life, but the life of the family. And then finally, it was a strategy problem. How do you move an entire city's population to one goal? How and why would all of a sudden DC students double their rate of enrollment in college and triple their rate of graduation? We knew that it couldn't be one-offs, not one, just help one kid. We knew we had to change the mindset of the city. And we did that by creating a culture, a college-going culture. And it worked. We were able to get the enrollment rate up to 60%. Our students were graduated at 50% nationally, which was above, at the time, the national average for African-American students. And it was, we were able to accomplish what we wanted to do, which was to establish a college-going culture. We now have families where we have 5 and 6 students from the same family where no one had ever been who have gone off to college. And so we know generationally that their kids and then their kids are more likely to pursue higher education. And so that's the kind of lasting trajectory that we were able to do. Now, it took me 40 years to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. But in retrospect, it all fit. I was an engineer who could build systems. I had been the product of an outstanding education, and so I knew firsthand how important education was in changing the trajectory of one's life. I was a minority who had personal knowledge of what it felt to be discriminated against, isolated and alone when you're sitting at the table and no one else at the table looks like you. And I was the immigrant daughter of one of the fiercest advocates for education and the progress of underrepresented minorities. So it all fit. The fact that I'm actually carrying out my mother's work is just the icing on the cake, but it was my journey that brought me to this point. And so right now, I've stepped down as the president and CEO of the DCCAP, the organization we started so long ago. And now I'm going to continue consulting, but this time with a mission and a very, very clear purpose. I'm going to continue to work to help school systems and schools support the progress of their underrepresented cohorts, and I'm also going to work with corporations to try to hook them up with higher ed to increase the pipeline of diversity. So really, I would just challenge each of one of you, particularly the young folks in the audience, not to think about just what you're going to be, but really what you're going to do with your life. What do you care about? What's going to inspire you every single day to get up and be your best, and maybe even inspire others around you? What's going to give meaning to your life? Because if you can answer those questions, the answers to those questions, it's what's going to lead you to your best work and arguably living your best life. So if anything you remember from what I've just said, just remember that life is not about what you're going to be, it's about what you're going to do with it. So thank you.